Test, 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 test. Test, 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 test. A little bit of a buzz, huh?
Testing. Testing. Good. All right, good morning, everyone. This is a joint committee of the Economic Development Committee and the Budget Committee. We're going to go ahead and get started. I know that the assessor has some time commitment, so we will start with him first. But first, before I get into that, let's go with roll call. I don't see any staff up here. I will go ahead and do roll call. Councilmember Morel. Present. Helena Moreno. Yes, I am here. And I saw Councilmember Jeruso. We have 3 members present who are part of the Budget Committee and 3 members present who are part of the joint of the Economic Development Committee, which means we do have a quorum. Okay, so with that, let me go ahead and get started with agenda item number 3, which is a presentation from the Orleans Parish Assessor's Office regarding the 2024 quadrennial assessment and appeals process. Mr. Williams, thank you so much, Assessor Williams, for being with us this morning. Of course, the reason why we asked you to come here today is because as we're hearing, every single day from our constituents, they are having the sticker shock over their latest assessments that they have received. They're looking online and literally they are calling our offices saying things like, I don't know if I can afford to even stay in my house at this point or even stay in the city of New Orleans because of this latest price hike that they're seeing. So with that, Mr. Assessor, we wanted to invite you in to explain to us, overall the process and how you came to the valuation of this very latest quadrennial assessment. Welcome to you and your team. Please introduce your team as well.
Okay, thank you. I'm Errol Williams, the Assessor, Orleans Parish.
Devin Johnson, Administrative Director.
Marina Khan, Chief Deputy.
So thank you all for the opportunity to share how this process works. I know this is probably my ninth quadrennial, so it's not something new to me, but in Louisiana, the law requires, the Constitution says that there shall be a appraisal every 4 years at intervals of not more than 4 years. It used to be at least once in a 4-year period. So my prior practice was to change values every year. That way you covered 25% of the district, and by the end of a 4-year period, you revalued everything. Under the present tax commission, they required me to do it all at one time. So your volume's up in relationship to what you normally would get in a normal process. But the quadrennial reappraisal is set by the Louisiana Tax Commission. And on slide 2, it just basically says that all real property shall be reappraised based upon mandatory quadrennial cycle. And if you notice that in 16, it was January 1's valuation date of 2015. 2020 was January 1 of 2019 was the valuation date. This year, the 24 quadrennial revaluation date is January 1 of 2023. So that means that every property that has sold over the past 4 years, we've reviewed them, analyzed them, and came up with what we think is the average value based upon the size of the property, its type of construction, okay, and condition of the property. Now we get into how we determine the values of property. Under Article 7, Section 18, all property subject to ad valorem taxation shall be listed on the assessment rolls at its assessed value, which shall be a percentage of its fair market value. And that is going to be, basically is 10% on land, 10% on the building if it's residential, 15% on commercial buildings, public service is 25%, and public utilities, that's basically 25%. Personal property, which was a business property, office furniture, fixtures, equipment, inventory, is assessed at 15% of its fair market value. And basically, keep in mind that fair market value is an estimate, and the appraisal process is not an exact science. Okay, it's an estimate of value, and we generally try and analyze the data before we assign it. And so when we start talking about fair market value, it's the price for property which would be agreed upon between a willing and informed buyer and a willing and informed seller under usual and ordinary circumstances. It shall be the highest price estimated in terms of money which property will bring if exposed for sale on the open market. That's generally what the definition. There are 3 approaches to value: the market approach, cost approach, and the income approach. And each one of them have a different methodology. Our preferred method for residential property is the market approach, okay, because it gives you what people are paying in their respective neighborhoods. Cost approach is generally used for new construction and outlier property where sufficient data is not available. Yeah, that's basically how we get there. Income approach, we usually try and apply that only for income producing properties where there are 10 units or more. If that says that a person's got a double house, if they have a one vacancy, it would indicate that the property is worth 50% less. That is not the case. So the standard among appraisers is at least 10 units or more before you use the income approach to value. So that's just one thing. How do we find fair market value? Louisiana Tax Commission rules, Chapter 1, basically says fair market value of real estate shall be determined by the following general recognized appraisal procedures, which is basically the market approach, cost approach, and income approach. You utilize the market approach, it shall use an appraisal technique in which the market value estimate is predicted upon prices paid in the actual market transactions and current listings. The other approaches are basically, we use Marsh & Swift income approach, which is a national service that tells us what, based upon the size of the property, type of construction is, what the cost approach is. The income approach is generally used when people provide us the income and expense statements for their particular business. If it's a hotel, it's an office building or apartment complex, that's generally what we use. Here's where a lot of people don't understand, and we'll try and explain the difference between single property appraisal and mass appraisal. Computer assisted mass appraisal is basically a system where you take massive amounts of data contained in current accurate information about property characteristics, real estate transactions, cost, depreciation, and other economic factors for the real estate market. This information is analyzed to generally value estimates for the purposes of taxation. So under the CAMA system is a appraisal system where we take groups of property on a given date using statistical testing. In Louisiana, mass appraisal are performed by a curbside view. In some states such as New Jersey and New England, assessors have to schedule appointments. They go in everybody's house to determine what it is, similar to what the independent fee appraiser does. The assessors also use square footage, type of construction, and the condition of property for evaluation. CAMA is a preferred methodology for determining property assessments in a uniform and equitable manner for the purposes of taxation. That is the system we use. The single fee appraisal or simple appraisal is an in-depth analysis of one single property as of a given date. So to give you some example that even though we generally revalue property in mass groups, when there's an appeal of a particular piece of property, it is what that one property is worth. And that's generally what the single property appraisal does. Generally, we will, if we see an appraiser that has done a recent appraisal within the last 3 years on property, we generally will defer to that appraisal because that guy has the benefit of having going in the house versus not looking at it from the curbside view as we do. Okay, appraisals are usually contracted by the property owner, and the appraiser inspects the inside and out of the property. That's generally the way they do it. We don't get to go inside these houses. He usually deals with the highest and best use. Fee simple is often utilized for mortgage financing, estate planning, and legal proceedings. CAMA groups of property with consolidations with 7 assessors' office. We had to break New Orleans down by neighborhoods. So we created 393 neighborhoods, which are residential, 141 commercial neighborhoods. Each neighborhood is clearly defined and outlined on our website. For those people who visit the website to see where their neighborhood lines begin and where they end at. And the neighborhood is determined by geographic proximity, similar property types, market analysis, and comparable sales. Statistical clustering is one of the things that we use where we take tasks of grouping a set of objects of similar size and condition and price. I have included on here just for a little reference purpose, and that is just a zip code breakdown from the multi-listing service that shows what the values of properties were in 2019 per square foot and what the values are now per square foot, okay, in those given zip codes. Those are properties that the realtors in them considered as excellent and in very good condition. If you flip the page to the next one, it'll show that these are properties in average and fair condition, and it shows in the same neighborhoods. It shows what the difference in prices are from 2019 to 23. Those values, as you can see, and what's really strange to us is when we looked at it, we found that the average and fair houses were selling for more per square foot than the houses that were, okay, in excellent condition. You know, we don't know the reason why, but that's what the market data shows. The next page is basically a scattergram, to give you an idea based upon the price paid for property and the size of the property. These are where the sales fell at, meaning the blue represents where they were, and the red represents where we think to plot the straight line to try and make sure that those that bought the property at a higher price got reduced, and those who were underpaid got raised up to what the average price is. That's basically the way that system works. The intent behind the reappraisal process is to try and create a bell-shaped curve that's a normal bell-shaped curve, and that is that where 68% of the property values will fall within the orange section of that bell-shaped curve that you have above you. Okay, and 95% of the value should fall within the green and orange areas of this bell-shaped curve, and 5% of them should fall in the purple area. That's idealistic. The reality of it is when you run the numbers, it doesn't always present that way. But if that curve, if you were what they call it, if you're using the term chasing sales, then everything would fall within the first 10% plus or minus. So here's what happens in Louisiana. The law says 10% of fair market value. So you can be at 9% and be compliant with the law, or you can be at 11% and be compliant with the law. That means 10% away from the mean, the median values. In most cases, few assessors in this state, okay, have values that fall within that, the whole curve falls within that tight. I call that tight. It's so tight that you see that it is indicative of you chasing a sale. So oftentimes people don't understand the concept, but basically that's how they evaluate whether or not you're chasing sales based upon what we get. Now, land values. I've had people call us here, why did my land double? Okay, I'll use this example. In my neighborhood across the bayou is a lot that sold for $500,000. It's a roughly 10,000 square foot lot. The guy paid $45 a square foot. If I took that land sale and applied it to all the property on the island, the guy across the street from him would have a $547,000 land value. And he just bought it for $492,000. So that means I would have a negative value on the building values. So I say that to say that we use the extraction method. The depreciated value of the improvements, which is the building, from the sale price, okay, of the improved property. The residual is, and in this case, the example we've showed is a $200,000 appraised value, and the depreciated value of the building is $150,000. So they left the land value at $50,000. Okay, just to give you the other method that we occasionally have to use is the allocation method, and that's one where, based upon the principle of balance, which states that there is a sense of proportion in value in land as a factor of value, should have a logical value relationship to total property value. Typical relationships are established by sale of improved properties with known land values in order to develop a proper ratio. At the bottom, it shows a 1-to-3 relationship for that 200,000. So that means that if I divide it by 4, then the land's worth 67,000. If I divided it by 5, it would be worth 50,000. My preferred method is 1-to-4, 1-to-5 in those cases where we have to utilize that. But generally, the residual method is the one that we use for most of the property in New Orleans. Now, the next question is, we often use the word sales chasing. Sales chasing as defined by the IWO, International Association of Assessing Offices, the practice of using the sale of a property to trigger a reappraisal of the property at or near the selling price. If sales, when such adjustments are used in a racial study, this practice causes invalid uniformity results and causes invalid appraisal levels results. unless similar sold properties are reappraised by a method that reduces the appraisal level for unsold properties equal to the appraisal level of sold properties. We generally will monitor sales, and the only reason we would change an assessment because of a sale is because it's new construction, it's recently been renovated, or there's an addition to the property, or there's a demolition. Those are changing characters, and under this guidelines we follow, we have the right to change the values based upon those conditions. Oftentimes, and I'll use this example, that we see a building permit, and the building permit never has a CO, certificate of occupancy, issued. And by not having that, we have to go out and discover that that property has been recently renovated. So it sells. So the assessor's job is to make sure that we pick up the value of the property if it's been recently renovated. Okay, because then usually the sale price will show a price far greater than what we have on it. I had one the other day, and it surprised me. It was on the rolls of $235,000. Two-story house and was in poor condition. Building permit was taken out for roughly about a little over $1,000, and it sells for $1.5 million. Okay, we looked and said, well, gee, but when we looked at the house the second time, it had been recently renovated and in excellent condition. So we recognized that obviously, first thing I said, did we have the wrong square footage on this house? No, or was that it was in poor condition, but it renovated it and it sold for that. So in that case, I have the right to change the assessment. Not to the 1.5, but what the properties was selling for in 2021. I mean, so 2020, okay, because of that valuation date. So that means I can't put it on for the 1.5, but if the property's values in that neighborhood was $200 a square foot, then I would have to put it on at 800,000. That's just giving you some idea of how that process works. Next is, this is just an example of sales chasing measured every year, contrary to people's most people don't understand that I don't have the ultimate say-so on my tax roll. Once the tax roll is closed, the Louisiana Tax Commission comes in. This year they did 1,000 property sample, and all 1,000 properties have to fall within that bell-shaped curve. And my coefficient of dispersion says it's 13.95. If I would have been greater than 15%, then the tax commission would not approve the tax roll. So it's a challenge every year to try and get the values in line, because in 18 we were at 13.8, 20 was at 12.3, and 13.95. So it's not indicative of us, okay, not paying attention, but we're trying to make sure that we get the values to what they make sense. Next on my presentation is the total assessed value for 23 versus 2024. And if you notice, there's a $9.2 billion total assessed valuation, which includes exempt properties and taxable properties. Okay, that's up from the previous year by 1.2 billion. Now that's not tax dollars. The rough tax dollars that was generated from 2023 was $715 million. Okay, and this year, based upon that number, it could be a slightly higher because there's a couple of taxing agencies that don't have in there, but it should go to $846,800, which would be $131 million more than what it is this year, based upon what our numbers show right now. But keep in mind that even though we raised these assessments 23% for this year, the average was somewhere between 5 to 7% is what our experience has taught us that it will drop. So that means that when people bring in, we often find that we have incorrect information based upon square footage, or we don't have the condition of the property on the inside, because you're looking at it from the curb. You don't know that an individual, okay, has damage inside. Like some of them, the one I saw this morning was the house was gutted. Outside, you wouldn't know that. Okay, and my people are not going to peep in the window to see, but when they bring the evidence to us, we make the necessary adjustments. My policy has always been, if you have problems with your property, the burden's on you. If you think our values are incorrect, you have the right to bring that information to us on an informal basis. Okay, and if we agree with you, we'll make the necessary changes. The mandatory reduction in tax rate, this is just something in the statute that people talk about the term roll back, roll forward. And the Constitution, as I understand it, that government agencies or tax recipient agencies must roll back the millage rate based upon the amount of the increase in property taxes, in assessments. Okay, if the assessments go down, there's a reduction, say the market goes down, then the tax recipient agencies, the millage rate automatically rolls up, so it cuts both ways. Okay, just to get some idea, our estimate based upon a 23% increase says this, that the tax rate would be dropping from 146.81, which is the current millage rate, to $113.04. What does that mean? And what it means is that the next page is just a simple example. And it says I got a house that's worth $200,000 on the tax rolls. In 2024, it goes to $250,000. That's a 25% increase based upon the homestead exemption in 2023. The taxable assessment was $12,500 times the tax rate that generated a tax bill of $1,825. And 24, based upon the increase, if the millage rates is rolled back to the new millage rate, then that means that their tax bill will go to $1,978. That would mean a $153 increase. Now, if the tax recipient agencies roll the millage forward to what the voters have approved, then that means that the tax bill on that property will go to $2,570. That's a $745 increase. Okay, just to give you some perspective of how that roll back and roll back forward. Now, what it also means that if somebody got an assessment increase greater than 23% or 25%, then their tax bill would be higher. Okay, and if their tax assessment did not change, then their tax bill would actually go down. So that's just the way the numbers work out when you run it. Okay, optional tax increases. Remember, all tax recipient agencies, it basically takes 2/3 votes for each tax recipient agency to roll the millage rate forward. I understand that the council is taking position that they will not roll it forward. Okay, that's a decision that's outside the assessor's office. External factors that we call negatives, substantial periods of low interest rates drove prices up. Sales volume has slowed recently due to higher interest rates, but values didn't adjust downward by the January 1, 2023 valuation date that we must use for the Louisiana Tax Commission. Short-term rentals have had a great influence on the neighborhoods as well as neighborhood gentrification. On taxpayers, we are aware, and I'm not immune to this process. Insurance premiums have increased significantly. My personal insurance has doubled. Inflationary costs has continued to hit everybody in the neighborhoods, and general frustration with city services. All of those are the issues that I hear. Okay, but mine is, I have a simple role as a ministerial duty to determine the fair market value of every property. That's the mission. We try our best to try and get there, and we understand that based upon the information that we have, that computer models don't always know what the properties are worth. So we try and make those necessary adjustments. External factors that we call positive. There's a homestead exemption, which probably at 75,000 should be increased. Okay, but there's not a whole lot of support in Baton Rouge to do it, not even among the Assessors Association. The disability freeze is now permanent thanks to the constitutional amendment passed in November 2022. New veterans exemption is in place now with the constitutional amendment passed in November. Okay, our parish, only parish in Louisiana right now that has a 30-day public inspection period. All other parishes have a 2-week public inspection period. Online scheduling system is what we use for anybody who wants to meet with us about the assessment. We have a virtual appointment system, online appeals, and then thanks to Act 718, thanks to Councilman Morrell and his help, we were able to get the 50% phase-in law passed. So that means that if a person's assessment goes up more than 50%, then their increase is only 25% each year for the next 4 years. External factors that are positive. Okay, constitutional amendment I tried to get passed was 10% assessment increase cap for homestead exemption after 15 years. We got close, but we didn't get close enough. It was less. It passed in New Orleans Parish by 76% of the voters, but we failed by 1/2%. So that means at some point down the road, during my tenure, we'll try again to try and get a cap on the assessment increases. If Texas has got a 10% cap, Arkansas has got a 5% cap on residential, 10% on, we should have the same thing. I don't see why we can't pass it, but I understand the logic because even among my Assessors Association, some of the assessors don't support that theory. Pending, I tried this year. We were not able to get it in Detroit, and in Utah, they have something called a hardship law. And in hardship law, that says that based upon the income of the individual, okay, then the tax recipient agencies can reduce their tax bill. So just to give y'all some idea of what we're trying to get past, then there's new LTC rules that's soliciting input from everybody on how to handle short-term rentals. We believe that if you rent part of your house out, that's a commercial use, it should be taxed as commercial. The problem we have there is that in Louisiana, apartment complexes, some of them are renting their apartments out as short-term rentals. And it's under current law, it's taxed at 10% because it's residential property. In all other states, it's considered commercial property. Until you change the law, we can't do it. And I think that's what the tax commission is looking at, trying to do that. So other than that, the automatic millage rollback, net taxes will be unchanged if recipient agencies do not raise the tax rate. That's basically what it is. How to dispute the assessment, because keep in mind, ours is just an opinion of what the value is, and there's 4 bites at the apple. Anybody who disagrees with the assessment has the right to do an informal appeal with the assessor's office, a formal appeal with the board of review, who hires an outside independent appraisal firm to look at the property and determine what the fair market value is. And they can agree with the assessor, agree with the property owner. In either case, that decision becomes final unless the assessor or the taxpayer decides that they want to challenge it at the next level, which is Louisiana Tax Commission. They have a full-time appraisal staff. They generally go out and determine what that property is worth on a fee sample basis, and they come up with a value. Sometimes we win, sometimes we lose. But the thing is that the process is independent of the assessor's office. So when we put a number out there, it ain't gospel. It means that's what we think it's worth. And these the appeal process. Now, if you don't like the decision of the Louisiana Tax Commission, don't like the decision of the Board of Review, don't like the decision of the assessor's office, you still have the right to take it to court. You only got to remind people that when you take it to court, you got to pay that lawyer, and that the taxes in dispute should be greater than what you got to pay that lawyer. Other than that, I'm open for questions from anybody from the council.
Thank you, Mr. Assessor. I'm going to take things a little bit out of order. We have 5 people who are here that would like to make a public comment. I'm going to go ahead and take them first, just because I know you're limited on time, and then we'll go through council questions. So first is Leah LeBlanc, and next will be Mary Meising Gubala.
Yeah, right now.
Hi, my name is Leah LeBlanc. I live on Oak Street and I work for the Greater New Orleans Housing Alliance and Housing NOLA. We want to thank the assessor and the council for coordinating this presentation and for attempting to add clarity around this concerning influx of increased property assessments we're seeing this year. The citizens of New Orleans are scared, and rightfully so, and advocates like us want to push our city leaders to prioritize the regulation of increasing property taxes as a way to preserve housing affordability and fight against displacement of our long-term residents. This issue will inevitably affect homeowners and renters alike, as landlords will begin to pass their rising housing costs onto their tenants through rent increases. Families are already struggling with rising insurance and energy costs with no end in sight, and they are frustrated because they are not seeing their tax dollars being used properly to fix issues like our crumbling infrastructure and roads. In order to stabilize our neighborhoods and guarantee security for all, we ask that the council begin taking a proactive approach towards utilizing their regulatory power over these increasing property assessments under your role as Board of Review. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Mary Meising Gubala, followed by Romney Richard.
Good morning.
Good morning.
I'm Mary Meising Gubala. I live at 319 South Genoa. I'm elderly, and one of the advantages of being elderly is that I have an age freeze, which will hopefully minimize the impact of any property tax increases for me. However, I'm here to speak for several of my younger neighbors who work and hence cannot be here. Mr. Williams says that the average increase in property tax assessment is 23%. One of the families in my neighborhood has seen a 47% increase, another a 50% increase, another 110% increase, and finally, one at 128% increase. None of them have done any major repairs or renovations in the past 4 years. All of them are average middle-class families, some with children. These kinds of increases in property taxes are an extreme burden on these young families. They and similarly affected families are thinking about moving out of the city, thereby further reducing the city's tax base. The increase in property values we're seeing in New Orleans are due in large part to out-of-town developers buying up properties left and right. Some of these are being converted, many of these, into short-term rentals or illegal college dormitories under the D2D name, I believe. This is threatening the very survival of our city. If something isn't done soon to treat middle-class, tax-paying residents of this city better, we'll soon end up with a city of very rich, very poor, and transient tourists and students that could care less about the city once they've left it. I implore you to find a way to make this right. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you, Mary. Romney Richard, followed by Gregory Martin.
Hi, my name is Romney Richard. I live in Mid-City and Mary just said everything I wanted to say. But I did want to say that our taxes went up 80% and I'm 73 years old. I haven't retired yet because I can't afford to retire because I have to pay taxes and insurance. So if something's not done for people, the middle class of this city, we're going to lose them. I've been here all my life and I don't want to see that happen. So please do something. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Richard. Gregory Martin? Gregory's still here. Put his card to the side. Michael Burnside. Come on up, Michael.
Sometimes I'm constructive and sometimes I'm not. So we'll try to be constructive here today. Michael Eric Burnside, 2215 Felicity. One of the first things that I would suggest is that by informing people on a 4-year cycle that their properties changed value brings with it a severe sticker shock that includes inflation. So if in fact it's a 23% increase, then people should know that over the same 4-year period, inflation alone is 19%. So if 19% is inflation and 23% is the increase, then your real property values are only actually increasing 1% a year. What we're really facing here is inflation. The next thing we need to deal with is the inflation should be adjusted yearly so that you can see it on a yearly basis and worry about the fair market value on the quadrennial. The next thing is hotels. Our assessor was kind enough to the hotel industry to severely lower their values during COVID. According to newspaper articles, the rate of return on rooms is back to where it was in 2019. Perhaps the assessor should return hotels to their previous value. The next thing is accurate information is, of course, the bugaboo of all computer models. I have 2 brand new houses adjacent to mine. Neither one of them shows up on the assessor's site as even having a building. They're still assessed at land value. So because the building and permit position computer system is broken in the city, the information it does feed or does not feed the assessor is itself broken. In regards to the land value, I personally believe that the land value is too low and I believe the buildings are too high. This can be shown by the buildings that are demoed to make room for new construction. If you're willing to demo a building, buy the building, and demo it so that you can build a new house on it, then the land's worth much more and the building's worth much less. Finally, he's correct in that the values of the houses have not gone down despite the energetic efforts of the Federal Reserve Board. And it might be a really interesting question to try to actually figure out why, because otherwise poor people are never going to afford a house. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Burnside. Last comment is from Mr. Larry Morgan. Mr. Morgan, come on up.
Good morning to all the councilmen
Morning.
and people in the house. It's good to see you all. I'm representing my people, Afro-America and other nationality of low income. This tax raise is going to affect them. You must consider the jobs that they hold and when they are given a raise, the low part of the percentage of the raise that they are given. They won't be able to accommodate and keep on occupying these houses when that percentage that they want are going to raise the tax. You will be running The poor people, a large percentage of them out of the city. And many of them discussed last night at the meeting. They want all you Black councilmen that came into their neighborhood and lobby for their vote to come forward and represent them. And they want you all to do everything in your power and your authority to make it possible where they can afford the rent when the landlord goes up on it, say, no, these people cannot afford the rent because their salary or their check, the welfare check in that cannot accommodate it. Now it's time for all you Black politicians to stand up for these people that you go into their neighborhood and hustle their vote. And now you owe them. And also I tell them many times, I said that you have a part to play to the voters. I said that when they elect a voter, a councilman, I say you must evaluate that person for the 4 years. I say, but you don't do that. And what you do, you just vote for them because of nationality or color. And that's why we have a man that is present today, governor over the tax department, served 2 years that don't give a damn about African America at the low level, and a big percentage of them put him there.
All right, now we will go ahead and go through some council questions. I have just a few, and then I'll turn it over to my colleagues. So from what I understand, Mr. Assessor, at least what I've seen reported in the media, is that roughly there's a 23% average increase in the assessment. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's what the, when we ran the numbers, preliminary tax rolls, that's where we are on the proposed tax rolls. As appeals come in and we make changes, that number will change. We think that swing is somewhere between 5 to 7%. Okay, which would be the amount of changes that we'll make. And I'll give you case in point. I see them and I sometimes wonder how we got there. Okay, I saw a house that was owned for $1.6 million. And I looked at the size of the house, I looked at the size of the lot, I said, there's no way this property is worth that property. Do we have an error? The error was the assessment. Okay, yeah, the house is only worth $612,000. Okay, in that neighborhood where it's located at. So, you know, my mission is to try and get it right, because the database that we use, we continue to try and update that. And that's so important when you're doing square footages on houses. And sometimes you find cases where when there were 7 assessors, we hired a firm, outside firm, to come in and measure every house in New Orleans, not realizing that the law don't allow you to go on those properties. So they put it together. In some cases, we had 2 property records cards. I had a lady in the warehouse district. She had an 800 square foot condominium. Because it said 2 stories, the system generated 1,600 square feet, which was wrong. Okay, and when she came in and brought the information to us, we made the necessary adjustments. Those things are things that you get that you have to make the necessary changes on.
So if across the board it's 23%, break that up for me on what it looks like just for residential properties. What's the average increase for just residential?
Oh, I don't have that breakdown. I have the total. I'd have to send it to you because we have it. It's just a matter of trying to break it down.
Yeah, I think that would be important if you could break it down on the average increase for residential properties and also for commercial as well. From what I understand, more than 6,000 properties received more than a 50% increase. Is that correct?
That's correct. Basically, those are properties that when we looked at them, evaluated them, we determined that the value that was on there was out of line. And in those cases, those people are subject to the phase in. That number will go down, okay, as people bring in the information to us. And that is that you got a 25% increase each year, okay, and your property tax. And that if I had a 48% increase in my taxes, I want the assessor to raise it to 50% because then I save money over the next 4 years because I'm only getting a 25% increase each year. But the problem is trying to identify those properties. We went through them and tried to make sure which ones was surprising to me. I found that there were at least 40% of them were on I call it the 7 ward side of the bayou. Okay, which I thought was, I thought there would have been more okay, uptown, because I'm getting, as I look at these sales on the $1 million homes, I've seen 1.5 million being paid for property that's on the roads between 600,000 and 800,000. Those are things that sort of scare me because in my entire tenure, I've not seen that many $1 million sales, okay, in New Orleans. But I have a video that I showed during the opening of the roads, and that's just a snip of what maybe 125 of the properties that we've had that have increased substantially. Okay, and the question is, based upon those, you got to go to, and what's strange is they're running 3,000 to 4,000 square foot houses. Okay, and we say Lakeview is beginning to get them, 4th district, 6th district, and part of 7th district, we're beginning to see more of those, which, is sort of scary because then as you take those comparable properties that are 3,000, 4,000 square foot, those averages, drive those values up. Okay, and we're saying not everybody has renovated their house. Okay, and not everybody has, what you call it, built new houses. New houses are usually treated separately from the house that's been in the neighborhood. We call original houses versus the new houses because they sell for more per square foot. And so we try to make those adjustments. It's taken us a while to get to this point. I think this year we're closer to what we think fair market values on many of the properties than we've been there. And now we know that there's errors and we all pause to make those changes. That's why we have the 3 locations for people to come in and bring the evidence. And keep in mind that even though the tax rolls close on the 18th is the last day you can file an appeal. If somebody brings me, and a lot of people wait until they get the tax bill and they show up. If they bring us evidence that is wrong, we make the adjustments regardless of whether the tax rolls are closed. We put through change orders. That's the process. And probably the tax commission tells you that because we do our changes before the year begins. All the other parishes will do their changes in August of next year. So they get a better picture of what's transpiring versus
So
us.
for people who come to see you, what percentage of those who come to see you ultimately get a reduction?
That I've never, I ran a statistic on that. All I know is that usually somewhere between 7,000 and 8,000 people show up during the open enroll period. This is a 30-day period because when it was it's impossible doing it in 2 weeks. That's why we expanded it to, thanks to you and when y'all in the legislature to 30 days. The intent was to try and give people more opportunity to do it. And then those people, as the people who are out of town are working, they can do it at home. All they got to do is schedule a virtual appointment or file an appeal
do it
form online.
Right.
And when you file an appeal, somebody's appraisal staff is going to look at that property and see whether we agree with the information they provide. Okay, we say if you got damage in your property, send us photographs. They speak louder than words because people are sometimes not easy to what you call when telling you the truth. I got people who come to us and say that my property is not repaired, and they bring pictures from Katrina, which is not the case. Okay, so but those are the things that we try and do and make sure that we're accommodating to the people that we serve. Everybody's not going to agree with value. I'm not happy with my assessment. Okay, I got a 34% increase in my assessment value. I agree on the land. I don't agree on the building value, but that's just me personally. Okay, but my insurance is double just like everybody else. So luckily the Lord's blessed me. I can afford to pay it, but still I got all the people that I grew up with.
So are you going to appeal your own assessment?
Yes.
Okay.
Well, keep in mind that what people don't realize is that the Louisiana Tax Commission sends an appraiser to appraise my property, everything that I own. So that keeps it above board. Okay, to make sure that they agree with me or they disagree with me, and I have to take what they give me. But I know that from my own personal side.
Yeah,
Okay.
you disagree with your own office's assessment of your own property. Okay.
Thank you
Yeah,
for that.
yes, I do have a question about sales. You mentioned sales. And you did obviously in your presentation define sales chasing, which is determining value just based on recent sales. In 2019, as you know, there was a BGR report and that found that you had practiced sales chasing, which is a prohibited practice by the Louisiana Tax Commission. In 2020, the Louisiana Legislative Auditor also found the same thing, that you had also practiced sales chasing. And, and at the end of the day, there were some individuals with recently sold homes who paid 15% higher than they should have, is what the legislative auditor found in his report. Did you practice any sales chasing in this most recent quadrennial assessment?
Just to clarify, I didn't agree with the Board of Review, the Bureau of Governmental Research, nor the legislative auditor. The only reason the legislative auditor came in is to review my assessments is because the tax commission chairman was angry that I didn't change all the assessments at 1 year, so he stick them on. But then when you do a sales ratio study, there's an appeal period. Okay, and the appeal period says that when you present your evidence, the assessor has the right to show you that the reason why that assessment is undervalued or overvalued is because it may be that it has an age freeze on it, or it could have a disability freeze on it, or that there was a change in the character of the property because they're renovated. Okay, but in the case of the legislative auditor, they wouldn't share their sales ratio study analysis on it. So I considered that whole report we have a response that anybody can read. I considered that report was staged to make it look like I chase sales. Okay, I don't chase sales. I analyze all the sales. Okay, but if there's a change in character, I will change the value on the property, and that's within the Constitution of the rules and regs of the Louisiana Tax Commission, that you can change the values based upon that. And that in the case I gave you earlier, that $200,000 house. Okay, if I didn't change it to what the value was in 2019 to 800,000, then I would have put it on there for 1.5 million, what it sold for. That's why I'm saying that when you do the sales ratio study, the bell-shaped curve is not the normal bell-shaped curve. It's so tight. That means that your values are reflecting what everybody's selling for. So if that was the case, all I do is I don't need a staff. I just wait till the property sells and put it on there for what it's worth. That's not what we do. There's a lot more research that goes into this stuff before we.
Well, let me just ask you the question again so you can answer it clearly. Did you engage in sales
No.
pacing
Good
for this
answer.
quadrennial assessment? Thank you. And my final question, and I'll turn it over to my colleagues because I know they have questions as well. You know, obviously we've seen home prices rise throughout the metropolitan area for many years. Now we saw it during the last quadrennial assessment. Obviously we're seeing it here. My question is, and we saw this during the last quadrennial assessment where, you know, for example, Jefferson Parish had a huge rise in property prices as well, home prices, just as we did. But what we're seeing in other parishes is that there's a very minimal average percentage increase. You know, last quadrennial, I think Jefferson Parish had like 3.4% increase in their assessment, even though their house prices and things like that went up much more than that. So why is it that in our parish, it always seems like we are whacked with these like really huge increases? In 2019, I believe it was roughly 15%. Once again, you know, now we're looking at 23, likely reduced a little bit to 15 or 16 again. Why is that?
Within the 4-year period, you probably saw a 3 to 4% increase. Okay, but when you do the 4-year revaluation, that's only the 3 to 4% is tied to what the changes are in character of the property, new construction coming on the roads, and then we changes like that. In the other parishes, I'll say it like this, and I don't fear anything from anyone, and that is that some practices say that, and when you had 7 assessors, that's why they went to 1. We raise values to what fair market value is, and some assessors say, well, I'm only going to raise it 3% or 4% this year. I don't subscribe to that philosophy if I'm going to follow the guidelines I've been taught. And that is that, you know, if there's a 3 or 4% increase across the board, okay, and the values are higher, I'd like to test some of the other parishes' assessments and what the prices they sold for and see whether or not it's a practice, or is it that the true value is 3 to 4% increase over what it was before. But I know that in the interim 4-year period, you're going to see a 3 to 4% increase just for changes in new construction coming on the roads and changes in character, additions, we call renovations and stuff like that.
Do you do internal ratio studies to check uniformity? How often do you do those?
Before I do every neighborhood,
So let's say over the past 4 years, how many of those internal ratio studies have you done?
393
393 over
on
the past,
residential, yes.
and those are kind of the self checks, right?
That's how to see whether or not the neighborhood should be changed. I'll give you a case in point. If you take East New Orleans, okay, the changes, if there's a substantial change in the property value, that means that our database was wrong. But most of them are showing maybe a a 3 to 7% increase. Okay, there's not many neighborhoods that have substantial increases in the neighborhood. So that's when we go through it and say, well, should I do this neighborhood? When we look at it and say yes, but the change is minimal. Okay, but then when you get to areas where it's highly desirable neighborhoods, okay, you see the change. And my biggest fear was that when you take the nonprofit organizations who build affordable housing and they build a house for $240,000, 1,100 square foot house in mid-city, and they sell it for $168,000. When we do revaluation, that property in that neighborhood is selling for $400,000 for the same size house. So I got to raise it to the level. My fear is that I'm running some of those people get caught where they wind up potentially losing their house as a result of the law that says I must treat them all the same. I was looking for solutions. That's why we tried to get we call hardship law put in place, or some law that says it protects those people who are in affordable housing, because the assessment process doesn't take that into consideration. It says these two houses are 1,400 square foot. They're selling for 300,000 to 400,000. Regardless of whether you pay 165 for it or not, it's got to go to that number.
And I am glad that you brought up nonprofits, because state law does require you to ensure that nonprofits annually reapply for their exemption. Is that occurring in your office?
That's only in New Orleans Parish, and I'll give you the history on that one. And a few years back, the assessors needed money to run their office. So we got Jeffrey Arnold to pass a bill that said that, okay, nonprofits had to file an application with the assessor's office every year. That's only in Orleans Parish.
And so is it happening?
No,
Why?
because I feel that it would be discriminatory. Anybody want to challenge me to court, of course, I'm going to throw it out. It shouldn't apply to Orleans Parish, it should apply to all the parishes.
Is that a violation of state law, though?
Well, I guess. Meaning that everybody who has an exemption, the nonprofit organization, has to meet 4 criteria. Nonprofit organization organized in the state of Louisiana, and would call it exempt from internal revenue. The next one is that they must not have any share in any of the profits or benefit from the nonprofit organization. And the fourth part is that if you dissolve the entity, it must go to another nonprofit organization. So for the $15 that I would get for doing that, I don't need the $15, because that's what it says. If you file an application, each nonprofit organization has to give us $15 every year. Okay, I don't need that. Okay, so if I don't comply with the law, I'll be taking the money when I don't need it.
Councilmember Green, you had questions? And then Joe, and then Leslie, JP.
That was a tough way to kind of express what you just expressed. Then why don't you try to get that law changed using the legislators who are in a position to change it? I'm not trying to put you on the spot, but the media is going to run with you saying that it's a state law that you're not following because
that's correct.
It would be an inconvenience at the tune of $15 to a nonprofit. There was a reason, and there was a debate where the public could participate. Again, I'm not trying to put you on the spot because I want to say something good afterwards, but that's just a tough way to end that discussion, that it's a state law and we're not following it because it could inconvenience a few people.
It's not that I haven't tried. It took me 3 years to get rid of the Mid-City Economic Development District, which finally got done this year after getting letters from Jay Darden's office saying that you got a board that's not functional. Okay, each time I go to the legislature, I try and get these things that don't make sense off the books. Okay, it's like the one with when you file a change of value, the person had under 1966 says the person has 5 days to file suit if he disagrees after we give him our final decision. I've tried to get that past the 30 days. I can't get support for it. Biggest thing is trying to get somebody to sponsor the bill. But I mean, I agree it should be taken off the books because it actually has no utility for the assessor's office in Orleans Parish anymore.
Okay.
We've never done it. Meaning before I came into the office, I didn't do it. The 7 assessors didn't do it, and I didn't do it.
That's a tough one for me, but okay, I'm going to move on beyond that.
Okay.
We've been talking, and many people use the expression, my property tax increase went up because of what Errol Williams sent me. Can you clarify for the public, which is something that is obvious to those who know, that your assessments don't necessarily mean that taxes are going to be increased? And then that's going to give me a chance to go into what the council has sent as a letter to all of the assessing bodies, asking them to roll back. So could you, in that since this is a public opportunity, talk about rolling back or rolling forward and actually what your assessment does relative to taxes, if anything.
The statutes say that once every 4 years, you have to bring the fair market values to all properties to the fair market value in each parish. Okay, in a quadrennial year, when you raise the assessments, if they go up, then the tax rate automatically goes down. In my example, I gave you, we'll go back to that. Okay, basically what you're trying to do is to say that government can get an increase in taxes, okay, unless they roll forward, which is the increase of tax. It's because the tax rate is automatically rolled back. It's mandatory. Inflation can't cause an increase in revenues unless the tax recipient agencies, school boards, city, board of liquidation, the what they call it, all the tax
Lakefront Management Authority, other.
all those who have a dedicated tax have to have a public meeting and tell the public that we're going to increase your tax rate, because in order to get an increase in property taxes, you got to have an assessment times the tax rate. So when the tax rate goes down, if it's 23%, then the millage rate goes down 23% if it's increased. Now, if the tax rate or the increase in assessments they go down by 23%, then the government is ensured that their money that they got this year will be guaranteed next year. So anytime you increase it, you're increasing it greater than what it was the year before.
Right.
Yeah, because that's why I say it was 715 million we generate this year.
Right.
And based upon the proposed increase, it could go to 800 plus million.
Right. I'm saying that to be public, because the media has a role here, but also the public, those who are advocates, for example, who want to protect people, et cetera, have an opportunity to go to the board or to write to each of the organizations, the school board, the Lakefront Management Authority, and all those other boards, and express their concerns and ask them to roll back the millage.
Yeah.
That is a fair assessment. And if I'm not using the words correctly,
You got it right.
Right. Because your assessments do not mean an increase in taxes per se.
No, it just says that this is what we think your house is worth.
Right.
Okay, now, in my own personal situation, I ran my numbers, it's $4,700 more I have to pay next year. But if the millage rate is rolled back to where it is right now, I pay $1,300, a big difference.
This city council has sent a letter just yesterday, and the media should know, maybe it's covered, and I'm sorry. Thank you, Councilman Giarrusso, for putting that letter together, where we've asked those taxing authorities to roll back, or basically to adjust, their millage to reflect the fact of the increasing property taxes. So when we as council members, my office gets a letter relative to the assessments, and it uses the terms, my taxes have gone up by such amount, it is important to understand that there is an option available in law.
That's right.
That allows the taxes to, in many instances, remain in place as they are now. And I have used my office as in my attendance at meetings, especially in my district where there are 20 neighborhood association meetings. Please do not interchange terms. Please do not assume. Let's do the work if you feel concerned relative to values to address the issue of the millage and the roll forward or roll back with those organizations that have that power. But the council has taken a role. It was signed by all 7 members of the council. So at the end of the day, the council has made a position in that regard. So obviously, we're not going to back down on that since we've actually signed it, all 7 members. But we don't have the ability to say to other organizations what they can do. We only make a recommendation, but we've made our recommendation. I just want to encourage advocates to recognize that sometimes we ask for certain things in the law, they get granted, and then we don't take advantage of them.
Yeah, well, it's a constant education process to try and tell the public how government actually works. Okay, in that case in point, people still think that as a tax assessor, you collect the taxes, you sell the property at tax sale. Okay, and that's not the case, but that's just no matter how hard you try, you continue to do it every day to show people how government actually operates.
Can you talk about, for example, oh no, not for example, it's not really an example, but just so the public will know that there was an opportunity to freeze, or not to freeze, but to place limits on assessment increases. It went before the voters. It was State Representative Willard's attempt at a constitutional amendment. Could you talk to voters about what that presented as an option? Because turnout was low relative to what it should have been, in my opinion. And it was a statewide initiative because it was a constitutional amendment. Do you see that coming back up again? And it may not be fair to ask you that. It would be fair to
Well-
ask a legislator. But can you talk about what happened during that election and what the intent was? Because you supported it.
Oh, yes. Oh, well, actually, I'm the guy who's been trying for 15 years to get it. Okay, and thanks to Councilman Moreno, she supported the issue too. And Councilman JP Morrell remembered that when we did the phase in, we were trying to get 10% cap then. The legislature was not receptive to it. Okay, I was able to get the Assessors Association to hold their nose and not oppose it. Okay, but we will come back again. Now, here's what the numbers show. 58,000 people who voted in that election did not vote on that issue, because probably that means that they didn't understand it. Okay, but we got within what, 7,000 votes of passing it. Okay, and that would have provided protection for people from substantial increases in taxes based upon the law. Okay, but we will come back again, okay, to try and see if we can get it passed. Now, what I did was, maybe what I didn't do was maybe a better job of educating the public on it, but I know that some parishes, particularly Lafayette and East Baton Rouge, was where we got killed at, okay, on the numbers. So that took it in the other direction, but I was able to get some assessors to agree that it was in the best interest of the public to try and do that, to put a cap on what we can increase assessments. There were 11 states I knew. I knew that in Chicago was only, when it first came out, it was 7% for Cook County. And then all the other counties finally came on and they raised it to 20%. So statewide in Illinois, it's 20%. The intent is to try and provide some protection, because if the homestead exemption is not going up from 75,000, values are going up somewhere. We got to find some way to get the balance where people don't wind up getting clobbered with these increases in assessments.
In order to roll back a millage, a 2/3 vote is required of a
That's right.
particular board, right?
That's correct. It takes 2/3 votes of each tax recipient agency to be able to roll forward, okay, the tax rate.
So at the end of the day,
Except the sheriff. I'm sorry, the sheriff is only one person, so they okay. There's no vote.
so sorry.
I'm sorry,
It's the law enforcement district, it's a taxing district, but again, that's law.
that's
Right?
right.
It's not something that we made up as a council. At the end of the day, it's law. And I just want to emphasize again, yes, it helps to be redundant, that the public has an opportunity to control taxes through going to taxing authorities and asking them to consider and to maybe vote
And not
at a
rolling forward.
2/3 roll and not roll them forward.
Mhm.
Right. I just want to make that clear to the media who is here too, because you can help with facts. Because I've even seen in the media, taxes are going to go up because of the increased assessment. Yeah, in some instances, if the value is incredibly increased, but not for the average person. And then actually, there are some people whose assessment have gone down, but that's a whole nother issue. That's not actually interesting to talk about. There's some neighborhoods where unfortunately some issues have happened that way. But at the end of the day, I digress and I shouldn't. My main point was that I encourage the public to take advantage of the opportunity to find out the agencies that are taxing bodies and go and talk to them. You still may not get the result that you want, but there is an opportunity for the public to weigh in on the tax increase side, in addition to the fact that we can individually weigh in on the assessment side
That's
by
right.
coming to your office through August the 18th, one of 3 locations, including the West Bank, the East Bank, and also by eventually, if you choose to do so, going to the Louisiana Tax Commission.
Well, I'll give you another one that you probably haven't thought of. It seems to be out there in left field, but that you can encourage everybody to file an appeal, and the Board of Review can say that I'm only gonna raise them by 10%. Okay, that means everybody would only have a 10% increase. I mean, that says on the residential property side, if that's what you want to take care of, you can do it that way. But I'm just giving you another option. I thought that was available, but you know, it seems to be way in left field, because you're a legislative body. Mine is I gotta determine fair market value, but the
Absolutely.
legislative body can decide what the level of increase they want it to be.
Right. This is the only forum that I have in a way, in addition to going to community meetings in my district, in addition to going to churches to get that word out. But let's assume that the word is out and it's going to get out, and everybody has a responsibility to let the taxpayers know that we should not interchange expressions such as property and tax increase with assessment.
Gotcha. Thank you.
Councilmember Drews.
Yeah, thank you, Councilmember Green, because we lived this last time. And just put simply, I think the letter from all 7 council members is we are not going to roll forward. You should not roll forward either. I don't know how to say it any more simply than that. Mr. Assessor, I want to ask you this. You said the burden is on the homeowner to appeal. For people like me who can, get an appraisal or bring their pictures or take off of work, no problem. I always use like Miss May in some part of the city as my example. So Miss May in Holly Grove, what is she supposed to do in terms of bringing evidence or making this easier for somebody like her?
Well, basically, if she does comparables in the neighborhood, she brings, that's what a lot of people do. They go and they have a realtor who doesn't charge them anything. They say, this is what we think the property is worth in that neighborhood. That's one option that's not costly. Okay, the other one is take pictures of your property so we know that we have the right quality condition on it. Okay, the other side is the size. If we were wrong, I ask her to bring that. But if she's, some of the elderly people, you call in and somebody will answer it. You call and schedule an appointment, and one of my appraisers will sit down at, through Zoom or do a telephone call and respond to you and take your information and try and make sure we didn't screw up on the valuation.
So,
And I'll add to that real quick, Councilmember. We actually opened our online appeal system yesterday morning, and we already have over 200 appeals there. It's super, super easy to appeal online. It's on our website. It's a standard Louisiana Tax Commission form that has a lot of very confusing information in it. People should know you only need to fill in the fields that are asterisked. All the other stuff that you don't know the answer to, just skip and give us the pictures, give us the survey, whatever documents you have to support your argument. I strongly encourage, because we anticipate in the next couple of weeks, it's going to turn into a madhouse. And so the more people who are aware of the online option and can do it at home and don't have to wait in line, we strongly encourage that.
He misses the point that everybody's not computer literate, especially Miss May. So mine is use the phone, okay, and then schedule it.
I think you're honing in on what my concern is that you have Miss May who either isn't computer literate, doesn't have access to the internet. And again, I worry about time, cost, and manner, like even going to get online and getting appraisals and coming there. I would love to see something that simplifies the process for people, because if the term is this is a madhouse, then it suggests there needs to be an appeals process that makes it as easy for.
Yeah, we're paused for the volume, but keep in mind, if we constantly run into problems of people that are 65 years of age and don't realize that they're able to have their assessment frozen, so they don't have to worry about this process. They won't even get a letter if the values go up. Okay, but the key thing for us is trying to make sure that we get it out, and we send a letter every year to every property owner, okay, saying that your homestead exemption is in place. If you made 65 or you became disabled, fill out this form that's attached and return it to us with the necessary information. Keep in mind, your income's got to be below $100,000. There's, I call it, there are some holes in the bucket. I got some people, put it this way, I got somebody on, and I'll just say it like this, I have somebody on Audubon Place with a freeze. Okay, that's because of what happened in COVID. Okay, with COVID and their business interests and their income flow from the business flow to their personal tax returns, so their income fell below 100,000. I call it a hole in the bucket, but it's there. Okay, and I follow the law.
Okay, in terms of evidence, appraisals is clearly one. You've said photos a number of times. People bringing evidence of other properties, do they have to go to their block? Do they go 2 blocks? I mean, how far out?
Well, generally, we're looking for it in the immediate neighborhood. On the website, we have a boundary set for that particular neighborhood they're in. And when they hit the website, it'll say what the boundaries are. Any sales in there that are comparable size properties. And then they bring insurance policies too. So we use that also as a factor to try and determine whether we're in the ballpark. Because sometimes, like one of the gentlemen said, sometimes the value on the building is greater because of that extraction method of trying to value land. Okay, yes, that's what if I raise the land, okay, then to what some of the people are paying for it today, then many of the houses will be on the rolls in the building value will be on in a negative value. Yeah, so that's why we use this extraction method to try and back into what the land rate should be.
I'm just asking the question because
Mhm.
the most comparable thing is sort of sewage and water board bills where they're like, bring evidence. And I just want to make sure that people know this is the gamut of evidence that you should be bringing, and these are the type of things that will validly be considered.
That's right. Thank you for helping on one of those that took 2 years to get a hearing.
There you go. And then can I ask one last question? I think you said sometimes permits can increase what's going on. I mean, how are we trying to incentivize? So, again, we'll use Miss May as the example. Miss May gets a permit to add a bedroom or add a bathroom, and then her assessment goes up, and then somebody who doesn't get a permit gets the benefit of not having that. I mean, how is there a hedge against somebody who plays by the rules and somebody who cheats?
What you don't know, you can't change. When you do get discovered, you make the necessary changes. Okay, and that's the problem with when you do an addition, and you have to pick up the value that's changed based upon that addition. Okay, but if somebody did it without a permit, we only discover it from our field observations. And again, I could tell people sometimes, my staff, I say, if you see a house in there and it's got it doesn't have a building permit, or it had a building permit, and you saw a nominal value, and you see all this major renovations. Okay, let's take note of it, and let's come back and see by the aerial photographs that we have in the system, which we take every year. We can go back and sketch sketch the square footage of that property and see whether or not our square footage is proper. Okay, and that way we'll pick up additions, but the people who did it illegal, that's the only way we're going to get them is to by going through what they call it change finders, a software they call it, where you see if there's a change in the property. And if there's a change in the property, that will key off that we got to go back and revalue that property.
Does safety and permits work with you at all to say, we've been notified now? So let me give you the example. I don't know if Mary's still here, but she alluded to it. We get complaints, and maybe Councilmember Harris does too, particularly on the doubles to dorms, that people are working without permits, or adding bedrooms, or adding units. And so particularly if you're converting single family or double family home into a purely commercial use, you're sardining in more kids into one place, and you don't have a permit. And then you've created an atmospheric where people will buy property at a higher value, then that all seems to hurt the neighbors as opposed to the people who are committing the bad conduct.
We've had a pretty good relationship, a working relationship with Safety Permits, but with the loss of a lot of the inspectors, okay, it sort of went, quantity of certificate of occupancies that went down. So it's more a discovery on our side. Now we work with them a lot on the short-term rentals because there's a group of people in there that's going out there catching the illegal short-term rentals. Okay, and that becomes another battle that, remember the fine is only $500 for cheating on a homestead exemption. Okay, in Florida is $5,000. It goes back 10 years. We can only go back 3 years, but oftentimes that Safety Permits is the one that keys us off because they got people out there at night going to see if the people are actually living there.
I don't know how Councilmember Morel or Moreno and Councilmember Green, you sort of just raised this, but if your incentive is $500, then we've created an incentive for people to cheat. I mean, I don't know what all the assessment issues are in the legislature, but I think that would be one place for us to start in this upcoming session, is to really significantly fine people. If you are fraudulently, you're hurting. I mean, what ultimately happens is you're hurting all the other residents by doing this. This is not a victimless crime. It's that everybody else's assessments and taxes go up because you're not paying your fair share.
In my 38 years, I've never filed suit against anybody, but in the last year, I've had 3 cases where someone lives in San Francisco, somebody lives in St. Bernard Parish, okay, with a very substantial residence. All of a sudden, they're a resident of Orleans Parish, okay, and we go to court, and it's a back and forth. So it doesn't make sense to spend $1,500 to $2,500 to fight over a battle of $500.
I agree. Okay, thank you.
Just briefly, Assessor Williams, you said something that I wrote down. Also, the burden is on you, but also I don't know why fair and average properties sell for a higher percentage. And I think you alluded to the speculative market, and Councilmember Jeruso just spoke about short-term rentals. I can tell you in Mid-City where Mary lives, there are a lot of short-term rentals, and you just heard that their property assessments have gone up 120%, 129%, 50%. So what is the impact and how can we mitigate against the speculative nature of short-term rentals and the impact on these assessments?
Well, the question is, I guess, is, and I think this is part of the study, should we start valuing those properties at 15% as commercial properties? I think that's where we should go with it. That's just one option. The other one is whatever policies y'all can put in place to sort of minimize it, the impact to some of the neighborhoods. Because some neighborhoods don't really want it, but they can't block it, okay, because of the way the law is. That you got to give everybody the opportunity to do it. But it is created a problem because, we have a full-time person. That's all they do between chasing dead people and short-term rental abuse. Okay, that's where, and it takes a while to build a file. Sometimes the file is that thick with paper where we're showing they've rented it out constantly as the entire house, but they claim that they're living there.
Yeah.
Okay, so maybe there may be a charge, because that's what one of the arguments was, and I won't air the case in here, but was that the guy claims that he's living there, but when we went online, we saw that he was renting out the unit that he allegedly was living in. Okay, so now what he did recently, he went and got a driver's license, a voter registration, and everything. So I had to give him the homestead exemption from that point forward. Okay, but the guy is renting out all 4 units.
Well, I mean, the thing that the council has done under court order is eliminate the requirement for homestead exemption. But what we're seeing is a proliferation of commercial short-term rental permits.
That's right.
So I hope that those will be assessed at a commercial level. You know, again, we talk about Brown's Dairy situation in here all the time where you have a village of commercial short-term rentals that I'm hoping are being assessed at a very high rate because the improvement on the land. We just need to make sure that y'all are working closely with our short-term rental office, and you might want to, this is a suggestion, staff up on that and the investigation, because you're going to see more short-term rental fraud as people are either applying for commercial short-term rentals, saying that they live there, or we just see these villages pop up.
Yeah, well, the Brown Velvet site, we looked at it and noticed that they were selling, as they build them, we're looking at somewhere between the $600,000 and $700,000 range. And we have a couple that we've fought before the tax commission that we know is worth 700,000. Okay, and they put it at 500,000 on it. But I'm thinking that if we go to a commercial side, that may be a sort of a limitation. Then you got 1111 Tulane, okay, which is recently, and they're selling them off in bulk like that, 8-10 units in the condos in order to be able to do that. Now, what's puzzling is the rental of the, what we call it, what's it called? I'm trying to think of the name of it. It's not short-term rental, but it's the condos that they rent.
The timeshares?
Timeshares.
Yeah.
Okay, that one there is another one out there, okay, that we try to value as condominiums, but it's one that I don't know if it should be, if you're renting it out, are they getting an occupational license to function as a hotel?
They should be, and
I don't know.
we're trying to close those loopholes,
Yeah.
but we will work with you, and that's my point, is we will work with you to figure out how we can make the impact of these properties that are some single-family homes in neighborhoods
Yes.
that have commercial short-term rental license, making sure that they are taxed as commercial entities at a higher rate than at a lower residential rate. And so again, my office is happy to work with you on this. I know the rest of the council is, but we just need to make sure that we are getting the most income we can from those properties that are taking over our neighborhoods.
I'll be
Glad to work
brief
with you.
because you have to leave shortly. Couple of things. I know you've mentioned repeatedly the phase-in language that you and I worked together to pass the legislature. That was passed via constitutional amendment. I think it's important to note because people often ask, well, where is it? And the reality is that when we pass that constitutional amendment, it is up to the tax collecting authority to provide the form to ask for the phase-in. I know that when I came into office 2 years ago, there was no form provided by the Bureau of Treasury or the Finance Department for phase-in. I just pulled up their website. There is still no form for phase-in. So for those of you watching, we passed a resolution last year trying to figure out what was the administration's resistance to the phase-in requirement that is in the Constitution now. And we're still working on getting that resolved. But to your point, very few people have been able to take advantage, if any, of the phase-in because the form required to do it is on the city and we're not doing it. So before everyone talks about how the assessor is raising my taxes, when we're able to get relief, The city, as a tax collecting authority, is responsible for that phase-in. Though the council as the legislative branch of government has stated, we do not want to roll forward, there will be a vote on that not rolling forward. And typically speaking, and I'd be very surprised if this is different, in every instance, what often happens across the state is executive branches show up with a wish list of projects saying, but if you'd roll forward, we could do all these things. I suspect that will still occur, but to your point, just because you referenced it many times, we did pass that, you and I working together, and this administration refuses to implement it. So that's just one. Two, with tax commission and appeals. I know we talked briefly about nonprofits. My understanding, you can correct me if I'm wrong, there have been instances in which you tried to find a nonprofit as a nonprofit and the tax commission overruled you. Is that correct?
No.
No? Okay.
The tax commission doesn't deal with the legality issues. It maybe
Then
they
the
deal with the
question,
values.
then the question becomes, and I appreciate that answer. Absent the $15, I think a lot of people would argue, if you've got a piece of property, because when you talk to other assessors, I've talked to ones in St. Bernard, I've talked to ones in Jefferson, for example, take the $15 law aside. I think it is prudent, because as you know, the tax burden of all of our citizens is based upon the amount of taxable real estate in a jurisdiction. We have 35% of property that arguably that is nonprofit. Regardless of this $15 fee, wouldn't it be prudent during that 4-year reevaluation to make them show up with something showing they're still a nonprofit? Because what other jurisdictions do, I've talked to Mr. Capella in Jefferson Parish, for example, is when they're he typically assessed that nonprofit property at its rate and says, show up and show me it's not a nonprofit. I think it would be reasonable to expect, and I would encourage you to do so, that by default, why not take the position the property isn't a nonprofit unless they show up with receipts? That's the reverse, I guess, of what the law currently requires.
Well, I toyed with the idea of just canceling the exemption every year and then having them reapply every year. That was one way to try and get it.
I think some kind of movement would be appreciated, only because we know, just looking at neighborhoods, that we'll see a property that might have belonged to a nonprofit or a church 26 years ago. Just the neighborhood knows the pastor's dead. There's no one in the church meets at a different location. It's not really a nonprofit owned property anymore. But when you look on the assessment website, you'll look up a church or a business that hasn't registered with the Secretary of State in a decade. I think if we took the aggressive position saying by default, you have to reapply annually, or at least having that 4-year reappraisal, we're going to appraise these all as for-profit or residential property, make the people show up with at least some bare documentation, not just the LLC, which says nonprofit LLC, but like show up with a 501c3 form, show up with some documents proving you're a nonprofit, because the more of those, I guess I'd say, fake nonprofits we put on the rolls, it lowers the burden to everyone else. And I mean, we have a tremendous amount of nonprofit property that's owned by even legitimate nonprofits, but the property is for a for-profit purpose. And I'll give you the example that we talk about across the state, and I recall talking with assessors about it. If Tulane owns a piece of property with a McDonald's on it, that is not for an educational purpose. That's a McDonald's. And many assessors would say, well, if you've got a McDonald's on the site, that's a commercial property. I want my, 15% on that site. Now, Tulane might say, but we're using that money for education. But I think you would find this council and the city very amenable to the idea of prove it. And I mean, honestly, I think that if there were a conversation with nonprofits about the city even sharing some of the costs of litigation just to prove the point, we'd be willing to do it. I mean, like if you got property where you've got a billboard or you've got a McDonald's or you've got some commercial entity, I think it's important to set up a couple of test balloons, because once you win one of those cases, then they cascade down. Because at that point, you just, they talk to us, because we want to.
We tax those, the Chick-fil-A's, the, what's called it, the Sodexo, and all the locations where they have their private businesses in there. That's treated separate from the regular exempt property. And that's just part of the process, but it can spur a little more interest. Okay, but then also there's another component that we do. We check monthly the internal revenue status, because each one of these nonprofits have to file a 990. And if they don't file a 990, then we pull the exemption. And then they show up and file a report, then we reinstate the exemption. That's generally how it
I
works.
think that is something that we can and should work with the legislature on, because what I find is that there are a lot of different jurisdictions where property is similarly positioned to New Orleans, and they won't find out in those jurisdictions, but they'll fight you tooth and nail here, thinking they have a sympathetic audience. The last thing is, I know that when we're looking at property, I appreciate you going back to how the one assessor was created. And I think that something that people don't understand is that when you came into office as the one assessor, one thing you found, I know in our conversations, is you had a historic problem in that you had a lot of property, particularly commercial property, that was historically undervalued. And when you talk about this raise in assessments, what is the average increase you've had of commercial properties in your most recent reassessment?
I don't have the breakdown. I'll give it to you. I didn't bring that down with me. I just took the total that would happen, but I can give you an example. Everybody's familiar with the apartment complex behind Costco's.
Right.
When I took over, it was on for $30,000. Okay, and that's so, those are the, as you discover them, you put them on there. I don't go and toot my horn on it, but we continue to discover, when we continue to discover that kind of stuff, commercial, we put them on there for what they're worth. Then the apartment complex that was on the other side of Washington, it wasn't on the rolls at all. So, but the law allows you to go back 3 years when you discover. So that means that when we discover, we give them notice, they have to come in and show us why they disagree with the value. And then, okay, we put them on the tax rolls.
Well, I think from a legislative perspective, I think the most important thing to do is to come up with a list of legislation to address a variety of issues. I don't think you're going to win on the fee amount,
No.
because I know that the legislature is very resistant to increasing municipal fees above $500. But as far as your clawback years or homestead exemption fraud for not being on the rolls, I think that's definitely doable. So if we can work with you as a council to put together a slate of different things that we think are viable, let's work together and get those done.
I'd be glad to do that, because there's always, changes that need to be made. And even with the fee, the $15, I have another way what to do with the money. You don't spend it.
Thank you.
Okay,
All right, Mr. Assessor, we promised that you'd be out of here at 11:30. It is 11:29.
thanks.
Thank
I
you.
gotta go to Baton Rouge.
All right. Thank you for your time. We
Thank
appreciate
you very
it.
much,
Thank you.
Mr. Assessor.
All right,
Councilman Moreno,
members, let me do some quick housekeeping, do the approval of the minutes of the April 25th.
Councilman Moreno, we had some online comments for the assessor's item.
Why don't you go ahead and add them to the record, because I've got a lot of people that need to leave. It'll be added to the record. Just go back to this particular agenda, and all the public comments on this matter online will be visible there. All right, the approval of the minutes. Can I get a motion? Moved by Councilmember Harris, seconded by the council president. All in favor? Aye. 4 yeas, no nays on the approval of the minutes. All right, with that, let's go to agenda item number 4. Presentation on the city's current status with the Municipal Police Employee Retirement System, EMPERS. Mr. Montano? Ms. Turner? Okay, Ms. Turner, I think you're part of this particular presentation as well. And it looks like Mr. White. Ms. Turner, are you all here? If not, I can take Dr. Avegno real quick with a very quick ordinance. Dr. Avegno here? Okay, now she's not. All right, so Gilbert's here. She's right there. They're all here. All right. Well, now they're here, so I'm going to take Gilbert first. All right, Mr. Montano, Ms. Turner. We have their presentation up. Okay, great.
We're just waiting on Norman. Give him one second, but
Okay.
I can begin the presentation. Let me make sure the technology is working. Okay. Madam Chair, you ready?
Whenever you are. Good
Okay.
morning to you both.
Good morning. If it pleases the council and the committee, good afternoon, Gilbert Montano, CAO, Denisha Turner, city attorney, and Norman White, chief financial officer, is going to be joining us as well. We'll drive through the presentation. I think the presentation demonstrates and speaks a little clearly about kind of the plan, the movement forward, and the various dynamics associated with it. I in no way will try to overcomplicate the subject or the issue, but when we're getting into some of the actuarial analysis, some of the pension systems, and some of the other dynamics associated, it will get a little bit complex. So I apologize in advance for that. So diving into the agenda, we're going to discuss the current litigation with Empers and the unfunded accrued liability relative to the statute. There'll be a technical piece, but then obviously with what we can share, a litigation strategy to address how we plan as a city and an organization to challenge what we feel is a completely inequitable and unfair situation that we are currently in.
Yeah, but if I can now through the chair, I heard the previous meeting. I wanted to make a correction so folks will understand if they have a problem with the tax. If you go on the website under frequently asked questions, there's information regarding the act. And also there is a video that folks can hear versus reading. And then there's a pamphlet that's in every bill and is also written on every bill, and a pamphlet handed out at the office. Just wanted to make sure people are aware of that before we pass on to the next subject. Thank you.
Thank you. No, thank you, Norman. So one of the things we want to highlight is that the issue that we're currently facing with Empers is basically one of three legally challenged positions the city of New Orleans is addressing. Wanted to highlight for the board the specific ongoing lawsuits that we currently have. One relates to the city of New Orleans, obviously, and Empers. This is a declaratory ruling judgment concerning the conversion of sick leave to Empers retirement credit. And secondly, and probably more vocally, was the declaratory ruling request regarding the contribution of pensions for the retention payments. A lot of officers and municipalities alike were very surprised at the amount taken out for the pension system. And we've heard that, and we've certainly taken that charge to challenge it and right what we think is equitable and relative to the officers' well-being. So both of these are in the 19th Judicial Court in East Baton Rouge and are in the pre-trial stage of litigation. So one of the things, and like I said, that is important for us to look about is the statute that we are all reflecting and talking about. And this was amended by the Louisiana legislature in 2018 to require a payment of an unfunded accrued liability to Empers upon full dissolution or partial dissolution of a participating police department. Empers informed the city that payments to Empers would become due beginning July 1st, 2023. And because Empers asserts that the quote, partial dissolution of the city's police departments beginning in FY 2021. And accordingly to the statute, if a participating employer partially dissolves its police department, the employer shall be liable for a pro rata portion of the system's unfunded accrued liability. I just want to drive one small word because this will be relevant as we start talking a little bit more toward the litigation and while we're challenging it. Dissolves its police department. Dissolves its police department. I think one of the key aspects here is that the city has not dissolved its police department. We've had separations and we've had retirements and we've had terminations, but in no way have we ever dissolved. And I think if I look into more clearly the intention of the legislation, it has to do with both a privatization or a consolidation of law enforcement entities. So I want to make sure that we're highlighting specifically what the target of this legislation is and how it's negatively, in fact, impacting the city of New Orleans. If you really boil it down, this is the only municipal police department this legislation was targeted. I think it can be argued maybe by the sheer numbers, maybe East Baton Rouge, but relatively, this is only a New Orleans-centric challenge that we feel is very concerning, and you'll see that later in the presentation. So this gives a little bit more in depth to the actual statute and what it's highlighting. It talks about the participating employer, such as the city, shall be deemed to have partially dissolved its police department if either of the two following occurs. the number of participating employees of the employer as of June 30th of the current year is less than 70% of the number of participating employees of the current employer June 30th of the prior year, or two, the number of participating employees of the employer as of June 30th is at least 50 fewer than the number of participating employees of the employer as of June 30th of the prior year. The statute, quote, deems the city has partially dissolved the department, imposing the payments regardless of intent or effect. And this is what I highlighted prior to dissolved its police department. So Emperor's goes through the notification process that it had partially dissolved its police department in 2021 based on the loss of 66 officers in June 30th of 2021, and in FY22 based on the loss of another 138 officers as of June 30th, 2022. The combination of the two partial unfunded accrued liabilities results in the following payment schedule according to Emperor's actuarial consultants if nothing changes. And I also want to put a pin on the actuarial challenges that certainly the city plans to undertake. There is some methodology that goes into any kind of actuarial assessment, and the city is strong and willing to start unpacking and unraveling some of that methodology to ensure that there is an equitable and fair and legitimate process through this. It talks about the July payments and the portions that are astronomical that would unfairly penalize the city of New Orleans to the tune of about $38 million, absent of the intention of the legislation. The law department became involved in January 2023 of this, when the city comptroller, Frida, asked for advice from the city legal and financial obligations. On the advice of the city attorney, because of the situation we're in, they sent a letter to the finance department saying to pay this amount on July 12th, 2023. But as I said, the intention is always to challenge the statute and recoup any payments made once the litigation concludes successfully. So we're paying, but our plan is to not only challenge the lawsuit, but to recoup our payments in the future. The 2023 operating budget did not consider the monthly payments that Emperor's asserted the city must begin paying in July 23 due to the uncertainty of whether these payments should or could be legally made. And I think that this is an exposure conversation that the law department has certainly had with the city. We have many exposure conversations that we don't factor into the budget. This is one of many others. Sometimes we have others through executive session and the like, but this is also considered in that category. So this, I think, really goes to a little bit of the heart of it. And without getting into some of the details of the litigation strategies that we're attempting, wanted to highlight why we have some concerns relative to this particular information or this statute and the interpretation and the dynamics associated with it. So in 2018, the amendment purported targeted jurisdiction with municipal police departments who wanted to dissolve their police departments, merge their department with another jurisdiction, or contract these police services. So in theory, the intent was to prevent dissolution and make up for any losses of contributing members to Emperor's. In actuality, the statute unfairly goes beyond these goals to punish larger police departments. And I said this prior, this really only affects the city of New Orleans, perhaps East Baton Rouge, but it doesn't target sheriff's offices, wouldn't affect JP, who is also a large agency, but only the largest municipality police departments, which in this case is the city of New Orleans. Even during years where recruitment and retention is an enormous challenge, both locally and nationwide. So this is where it gets into a little bit of the legal argument. And so I won't overemphasize the vernacular, but the term absurd consequences is, as you all know, a challenge that the city plans to intake. So the statute deems that the city partially dissolved the department, regardless of intent or effect, as I previously said, and the application of the statute as written would clearly lead to absurd consequences. The intent of the statute is to punish participating employers who dissolve or partially dissolve their police departments. In contrast, applying the statute as written deems any reduction in the number of officers is an arbitrary number, 50, to be partial dissolution, regardless of the reasons the 50 officers left. Saying so, the state legislature arbitrarily picked a loss of 50 employees as a magic threshold to impute intent to the employer, as if a loss of 49 employees could not possibly be evidence of an intent to partially dissolve a police department, but a loss of one more employee is somehow purposeful, partial dissolution by the municipality. No intentional action by the employer is explicitly required by the statute. Thus, one city could purposely eliminate 49 employees per year without being deemed to partially dissolve, while another city could lose 50 officers due to the pandemic, a hurricane, or a nationwide shift in employment or retirement and deem it partially dissolved. That was just to kind of punctuate the arbitrariness of that number. And I think the next couple of stages when it deals with percentages and thresholds may better emphasize why we have concerns with this particular interpretation. The application of the statute as written would clearly lead to once again is this legal argument, absurd consequences. The intent of the statute is also to ensure adequate membership and contribution to Emperor's. If the effect of losing 50 officers is proven to be a 50-member loss at Emperor's, the statute could stand, but nothing in the statute addresses the transfer of participating employees between participating employers, in effect punishing participating employers for losses to contributing members that may not have been incurred. Just to better illustrate that, if we have an officer that leaves NOPD and goes to Kenner Police Department, there's actually not a net loss to Emperor's, but the city would be penalized as a result of one officer switching or moving police departments, and that's not clearly highlighted. Similarly, Emperor's could gain members statewide, thus experiencing no net loss in contributing to members when the city loses 50 officers the same year, and the city would be charged extra payments for 15 years, while Emperor's would receive a windfall that is not based on an actuarial science, excuse me. So speaking clearly, their pension could significantly increase by the additional officers in whatever local municipality, and ours decreases, we're penalized, and now they're continuing to grow and grow and grow their pension fund. The statute is prejudiced against larger police departments in urban areas. And when we were drafting this, I think this is the most impactful piece for me. By imposing a 30% threshold on smaller police departments and a roughly 5% threshold on larger departments, the city of New Orleans, assuming that we have 1,000-member force in 2021, it's illogical to equate even a 10% of officers in an effort to dissolve police departments or privatize police officers. So the rest of the state at a 30% threshold, New Orleans at a 5% threshold. That's just couldn't be the intention, and it's why one of the main reasons we plan to challenge it. So what are the steps moving forward? Obviously, Denise is here to my right that can go into any perspective issues. Only initial significant research has been conducted, but the absurd consequences argument's clear, and the financial and actuarial aspects of the Emperor's legislation must be analyzed to further support our claims. Emperors cannot be allowed to require higher contributions from the city following officer losses while also attempting to recoup unfunded accrued liability that does not actually exist. We're losing our officers for reasons that are completely independent from the reasons of the legislation. Emperors cannot be allowed to address their solvency issues by imposing financial penalties on urban cities, really just New Orleans, who cannot control single-digit percentage fluctuations in their officer population, such as tumultuous times. While legal strategies and exact claims may be best left confidential until a formal court ruling, the reasons stated above clearly show that the 2018 amendment of the statute should not be enforced as written, and the city of New Orleans should not owe these payments to Emperors. I know the question may arise legislatively, should we be addressing that? I think that's absolutely a valid concern that we should be looking toward. But prior to that, or maybe in conjunction with that, I think we need to tackle this legally based on the criteria just highlighted. So forgive the verbose nature of that presentation. As I said, it does have some complexities to it, but we're here to address any questions chairman or members of the committee may have. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Mr. Montano. I really just have a couple of questions and I'll turn it over to my colleagues. I was alerted of this particular issue, I guess a couple of weeks ago now, and I called you, Mr. Montano, about it. And then obviously my staff has had, and Councilmember Druso's staff as well, has had conversations with the leadership at Emperors. And they've also sent me corresponding emails and things like that. I don't understand why the city didn't engage with Emperors prior to January of 2023, or the law department didn't. Because from what I understand with Emperors, they had been warning the city about this for really a couple of years. And they'd also, said like, look, City of New Orleans, we can try to work something out. You all can refute the numbers and that apparently never happened. So that's really my first question. Like, why wasn't it until, January of 2023 that the law department got involved? And that there was really any work to try to solve this?
I'll defer that question.
That's when we were informed about the payment, and the question came to the law department whether the statute is legal and whether the payment should be made. So we're the law department. We don't do finance or retirement, but when it came to us, we definitely addressed it and answered the question.
Okay, so in the emails that I've seen, and this one will be directed to you, Mr. White, the emails that I've seen, you are the direct recipient, or you are CC'd on these emails. And so my question is, why not notify the law department like so much sooner that there were issues? Because obviously, the initial issues were coming out of like 2021. So why not notify them sooner? Why not take more proactive steps to try to ensure that we didn't have to go down this particular path?
Yeah, sure. Thank you. Well, finance negotiation with Empress started probably the year I got here, right? It wasn't just regarding this particular issue. It was regarding sick payments and also recently retention payments. So we had several meetings with them. Law department was involved. Anisha may not have been in those meetings, but law department was involved in those discussions regarding it. It wasn't until I recently understood that the solution issue came aboard where we got more into that conversation. And that was the latter part, beginning of this year. But we've been in conversation with Empress, the city finance department, as well as law department for quite a while now.
Okay, so I guess the other bigger thing is there appears to be a potential solution to all of this. And that solution was presented by Empress to some folks at NOMERS about the fact that employees of the police department, those who are under the direction of the chief, but maybe not police officers, actually could be eligible Empress employees. Therefore, those could be added to the tally. And because of that, the folks of Empress believe that that would wipe away these $38 million worth of payments. So why has there not been like a specific study done to try to figure out whether we can move some of these employees who might be in NOMERS over to Empress and see what we can do to actually make these employees whole should they lose out on anything out of leaving NOMERS and going into Empress?
Well, certainly that can be an option, but in our discussion with Empress, that was never one of the things that were brought about. Our particular issue when we brought to law department was really trying to figure out, do we need to make the payment or not? And those meetings took place. The options that you may see, I wasn't aware of those until you just mentioned them now.
Okay, well, this is weird because the director of Empress, Mr. Huxon, Ben Huxon, said, I mentioned this to the city earlier this year as a way of avoiding the partial dissolution payments. So, obviously there's some kind of lack of communication. He also provided to us an AG opinion, which does show that employees that would be eligible for Empress would be those who are under the direction of the police chief, meaning that they don't necessarily have to be police officers, but they just have to be under the direction of the police chief. So with all this being said, the council does have a resolution that we'll be considering on Thursday, which asks you, Mr. White, the Department of Finance, to do a thorough review about whether we can move, because we've got a couple hundred at least civilian employees, part of NOPD, maybe more. And of course, we're trying to build our civilian force there, about seeing if we can move those employees over to Empress and figuring out like all the different pieces there and whether it's workable, so that hopefully we can eliminate this $38 million payment.
Well, and I do understand the strategy and I get the point that you're making. But again, that wasn't a discussion with me and Empress. First, for me is, do we need to make the payment? If we're going to challenge this legally, do we need to come up with a solution if we don't understand or don't agree we need to make the payment? If we get to that point, then we should move to a strategy that will determine how do we reduce the amount of payment. But we're still at the point of, we don't agree that we need to make this payment. Then later on.
But you've already made the
Well, let me
payment.
finish my point. I get the
I think
point.
if we were in disagreement on, we didn't need to make the payment, but now we've made the payment. So now it's like, it shows that like
Well,
I guess we did agree that we
no, we
needed to make
didn't.
the
No,
payment.
let me finish my point. Only reason why we made the payment is because law department's recommendation, let's make the payment, let's challenge this in court so we don't have interest and penalties. What we also recognize is the state treasurer was holding additional funds from the state until we made those payments. So we were mounting a legal argument that we will go to court to resolve this issue because we disagree with the payment. But law department's suggestion was, let's not create interest and penalties, make the payment, and then we'll go ahead and reconcile it once that decision is made at that point. So we still don't agree with what this program is about. I think the city is undue targeted for this program, but I mean, that was our strategy.
All right, thank you. Councilmember Morale.
All right, I got a lot to say. So we'll start with the legal argument. I have to say this is the least interesting legal argument I've ever heard. What this boils down to is, according to the information that we've received, Emperors first gave us the notice of the city that we were in partially dissolved in 2021. Every argument you made about whether or not the statute was proper should have been made in 2021. Should have been made when you were first given notice of the city that we ran afoul of this statute. The appropriate time to make that argument is when you got the first notice, not when you're on the third notice. This really, to simplify for the public watching, this is sort of like if you get a phone call from someone, a credit union that you owe money to. They call you the first time. They wait a year. They call you the second time. They wait a year. On the third time, you decide you're going to say, I don't owe the money. Well, that would have been a good argument the first time you got the call. Now it looks like you're a deadbeat trying to dodge making the payment. I think that you are looking at your legal argument in a vacuum. The legislature was very intentional with the way the law was structured. Their goal as a legislative body is to make sure a pension system remains solvent. To Mr. Montano's point, we are the only one that is partially dissolved as far as the larger jurisdictions. To make the argument that because this negatively impacts New Orleans, we should take a look at the statute in this legislature with this judiciary has got to be the most, I'm going to be polite and say naive idea if you think you're going to be successful. To risk the financial solvency of all of the parties covered in Emperors because we don't want to pay, and to think that that's a legal argument that is going to be successful. I want to remind the public, and I made this comment while we were talking about the sheriff consent decree. The New Orleans City Council is not consulted on legal strategy. We don't get to decide which lawsuits the city files or doesn't file. Because I can tell you, talking to my other lawyer colleagues, we would never have agreed to file this stupid lawsuit because you're going to lose. You're going to lose. And more importantly, we have a paper trail of opportunities where Emperors tried previously to work to resolve this. To date, there's still a door open where they're offering alternatives to get out of this mess. We all know what happens when you file a lawsuit over something stupid and lose. Because once you lose, Emperors is not required to work with you anymore. And when you file this lawsuit and you lose this lawsuit, you're going to go from a body that is primarily focused on making sure it is financially solvent, trying to work with a jurisdiction, to a body that's saying, well, these people really don't want to work with us. And if that's the case, maybe we should stop offering options. Now, as far as the difference in the amount required for a larger city versus a smaller city, the reason why it's 5% versus 30% is because you have smaller municipal departments. The other three, in fact, that are insolvent are departments that have less than 10 people. So the reason why the threshold's higher for us is because for those smaller departments, they do 30% because you might have 3 people in their police department. So in order to trigger Emperor saying you're partially dissolved, the threshold is different based upon the size. That is reasonable, and the legislature was intentional in doing it that way. I want to highlight there are many municipal police departments around the state that all have the same hiring challenges we have. I appreciate the one part of your argument that's somewhat coherent, which deals with when a city police officer, when an NOPD officer goes to another municipal jurisdiction with an emperors. My question is, if that's our position, have we tracked that and made that argument to emperors over the last 2 years? Have we said, don't ding us for these 10 guys, they went to Kenner. Don't ding us for these 5 guys, they went to Baton Rouge. Because when you make these arguments in the vacuum 2 years later, after you haven't challenged or made the arguments, it looks disingenuous, like you're grabbing at straws. And I'm just very disappointed that we have a police department whose budget exceeds every other department in the city of New Orleans, to be candid. They have more money than any department in the city of New Orleans. And we're looking at anywhere from $38 million to higher of operational funds we may have to pay out if we can't resolve this. I'll be candid, that money's not coming anywhere but from NOPD. The final point I want to make is there's a 4th person that should be sitting right there, and that's the superintendent of the NOPD. Because though this is a problem that exists within the finance department, it is and will likely direct the operational ability of NOPD if we have to pull $40 million over 10 years out of their budget. And any police chief should know whether or not their department is partially dissolved underneath emperors. It's just, also, sorry, one more correction. It is disingenuous to bring up sheriff's departments when they're under a different retirement system. You can't just say law enforcement blocks. The sheriff's departments are under a different retirement system with a different contribution level. And to that point, I'll tell you what most jurisdictions do when they see a prestigious drop in the amount of employees they have. They contact their retirement systems in advance. In speaking to past sheriffs of other jurisdictions, when they want to eliminate positions or see that they're having attrition outpace recruitment, they will typically call the retirement system and say, what's the number I can't fall below? And once they find that number, they will fight tooth and nail to stay above it. One last comment, which is not the fault of this administration, is we really, as a city, should have contacted emperors when Mitch Landry did the hiring freeze at NOPD, because that is when the decline started. And when the hiring freeze was implemented during the consent decree negotiation, emperors should have been contacted so we could have got the numbers then, how the hiring freeze could potentially lead us to this position.
Madam Chair, Council President Morrell, I don't want to be disrespectful. I did let the chairman know that I have to step out briefly, but I will return and I will defer to the team members. But if I did check with the chair, I didn't expect the meeting to come here, but I'll be right back. So forgive my absence briefly. And I'll defer. I know Norman was about to address.
I just want to make it clear. It's not like we weren't in discussion with them. But as far as my purview, I'm going to discuss financial matters. In this particular case, it's not finance, it's budget, right? How do we fill the hole that's created by this particular legislation? When I talk to emperors, I would always include law department in those discussions because I can't talk about any other way. I stay within my lane. The other issue regarding most pension systems, as you are aware, just like our pension system, is, for example, if we lose employees and what we call our fully funded positions affected by the number of employees or whether it's investment. Once that actuarial report comes out the next year, what often comes out is the payment in those future years increase holistically. I get what the legislation intended to do is make sure it penalizes just New Orleans for the loss of those employees, even though they may go to another one. But I disagree where it would make that pension system insolvent. Pension systems are made inherently make sure it's solvent by ensuring payments come from the institution that funds it. But I respect all the other opinions, but those are the two things I want to respond to.
Councilmember Jeruso.
I guess I just want to start with expressing my frustration because so many of the things that we're trying to do, we have to work together. And when we did the last budget process, it's the administration has these priorities, the council has these priorities, the public has this, and how do you try and make so many of those fit? And I feel like this was sprung on us not knowing. And I think I speak for all of us, and if I'm wrong, let somebody say, it's not like a $500,000 obligation, it's a $38 million. And I guess we always have things that are unplanned or that we don't foresee or that there's contingencies. But if we know that there is a train coming down the tracks, then I think we have to be at the table as part of that too. So go ahead.
No, to your point, I think I try to be as candid as possible. I think you're aware of that. If I see something, I call your office. But if you and I talk, is generally is not just you and I, right? So most of your communication comes with Gilbert on the CEO. And so maybe, I'll make sure I transfer that conversation to him. But I do agree, anything that we know, we make sure we put out there so you're aware of it. When we build a budget, you understand the details that are associated with it. I don't want to be impacted by anything because I have to figure out how to adjust this budget to make it fit. That's not something that's stress-free to me. But personally, I think I get your point. I'll make sure I convey that to Gilbert.
Thank you. So I think we danced around this a little bit, but I'd like to know if we lose, then how is this being funded? Is it?
Well, I think what we have to do is we're going to look at the strategy first. And if that's the case, we'll arrange a meeting with MPERS. And if they have a different strategy, we'll work with it. I think the council president suggested there was something within the letter I didn't receive, but we'll go down that road. But we'll have to adjust the budget accordingly and figure out how do we move things around to make it fit over time. And what we're looking for is for this particular year, we're looking at somewhere around $430,000 or so. Next year is going to be a little bit rougher, a lot rougher.
All right. So where did the 430 from this year come from?
We haven't made the adjustment yet until once we look at the strategy regarding the lawsuit, we're going to go ahead and figure out how we adjust the budget depending on some departments have surpluses, other departments have deficit. When we go and make that adjustment to the budget and bring it before this body, this will be included in that adjustment.
Okay, I guess I'm confused because Councilmember Moreno said a payment has already been made. So if a payment's been made, that had to come from somewhere. So